interstellar war is definitely an interesting concept, and that we can definitely talk about the expanse, because that's definitely an interesting take on where things could go. I like the level of realism there. Definitely was a very interesting concept, and how people. Now, I would like to hope. I would like to, argue anyway that the only way we'll ever get that far is if we somehow evolve past these warlike tendencies. I feel like it's so easy for any random terrorist to nuke a whole world into oblivion. If they just get a hold of one ship, they hijack one ship with nukes, and then they somehow get around, the missile defenses. Who knows how easy it'll be to have missile defenses if you have a stealth warship of any kind. So it seems to me that if you don't evolve past that first, you're probably going to go extinct long before you even get to Mars or Saturn or any of these other places. So I definitely think that the war we're facing now is more a war of ideals. It's a war of, like you said, climate change, terrorism, addiction. It's kind of a war on addiction, so that we can all have a purpose and be motivated to do good things and to evolve past our warlike tendencies, right? So the only way we evolve to a place like the Expanse, I think, or Star Trek being the better example, the only way we get to Star Trek is if we first evolve past our warlike tendencies, which I think we're very close, and I do believe strongly it is possible. Most people argue it's not. That we're human. It's part of humanity to be greedy and violent. Always want more. But I strongly believe we can evolve past that. Once we realize that the rising tide rises all boats, and the cooperative world is definitely better for all of us, objectively better, then I think we can leave that warlike terrorist stuff behind us for many good reasons. It's just a matter of getting there, right?
Yeah, I think there's some caveats. For instance, for starters, I may be using the rising tide lifts all boats. Maybe in the global warming, climate change period is not as hopeful as it was intended. But it's just a point. What I wanted to say is that evolving past the violent tendencies, you can't really fully ever do that, because that's not that's based on how organisms work. Organisms like humans are about being adaptive, so they will always have capacities that may just lay dormant or latent, but can be activated very quickly and effectively by circumstances. So as our circumstances evolve past need for being violent, what you will probably see is that this sort of tendency will just start weakening. You can shift. Statistically, you can shift over long periods of time of true evolution. You will probably shift in terms of a natural predisposition for violence or a really violent temper or tendency would probably be becoming a smaller percentage of the population, or lower among most of the human population. But that sort of can solve that, actually can, because it's about how many people in the world want to wage wars. If the percentage drops below a certain percentage, then it can be managed, and wars can be prevented by the majority, because even if the majority isn't warlike, the smaller amount of people can't have an effective war that will be victorious over a much larger percentage of the population, because if they provoke them, then they will defend themselves. So it's just they also won't lose the capacity to become violent if necessary. So that sort of can manage itself. What it doesn't manage is terrorists. And there's a sort of a theory in science fiction, if you can call it that, that as you progress as a society, what it means on a calculable scientific level is the amount of energy that can be wielded by a single person. Or if you can translate it into terrorism, the amount of damage that a single rogue person can do to the larger society. Because of course, you said hijack a ship with nukes. What if you have antimatter bombs that are on orders of magnitude more powerful, meaning a just one could do the damage of I don't know the exact math, but 1,000 Tsar bombas or something. So in that case, it's becoming more about the ability to treat people with psychological issues in the society, or even treat it effectively, even maybe by using genetic engineering or to some extent in a very sci-fi distant future scenario. So
Yeah.
then there's some sort of balance between if we don't manage to do it right at a particular historical stage, then what that will lead to is a reset of civilization, because somebody will just bomb the planet, and that will destroy civilization and bring people back to a more primitive state, and then just they will start development over again. So that sort of can happen on any level. It's just that the way to deal with it, if you're expanding as a society or civilization into space, is that the more places you settle, the less that huge damage that a single individual can cause, the less is that a danger to the civilization as a whole, including a natural apocalypses or calamities like a comet impact or something to that effect. If you're just spread out over several solar systems, then that's also a mitigating factor. In terms of survival of civilization, of course, it would be terrible if that one terrorist blew up Earth at that point also. It would still be terrible. But if Earth is all you've got, then that's the end, if that happens.
Exactly.
So it's just a battle of statistics almost.
It is. But I do feel pretty strongly that the key solution to avoiding a world like The Expanse, where you do have this kind of terrorism, avoiding that world, the key solution, I think, is dealing with scarcity first, right? So that basically no one's left behind. You don't want these belters to be starving. Everyone's taken care of. Everyone at least has the bare minimum. They've got food, they've got health care, whatever it takes. And I think terrorism is a big part of that too. Really, the only reason to be a terrorist is because your family was killed, or you're starving, or something went wrong in your life. You got left behind for some reason.
I would,
and that led you to terrorism.
A little bit, because that's a common argument, and I think it's broadly has merit. But there's also a counter argument. It's not 100% this simple. I have read some analysis that said or concluded that many of the terrorists that were responsible for something like 9/11 didn't fall into this category. They were from well-off, middle-class families, and didn't really have a terrible upbringing, or didn't live through great suffering. The mechanism there was ideological. So there's a mechanism for producing a terrorist even when you're affluent. It's last time I mentioned the post-materialist mindset, when you've already have your needs met, that it does lead to, in some cases, people becoming ideological about essentially made-up problems, and that can include motivation to terrorist action.
Yeah, that's a good point, but let me counter that for a sec, because I do believe that a lot of that idealism comes from their friends or people in their country being poor, right? So even though they're well off, the richest of the rich, they look around the world, they see 1 billion people dying of starvation, and that motivates them to want to make a difference, right? But if everybody in the world had at least the bare minimum, then there wasn't that, we weren't nuking. I think a lot of that idealism comes too. Again, the war on Iraq, us kind of bombing Iraq, even though their families may not have been affected, a lot of their friends, or guaranteed, they knew people who were. They knew people who were bombed in those wars, and that led them to the idealism.
Their tribe.
Their tribe was affected. Yeah, so every rich person in any of those Middle Eastern countries, they're all connected in some way to that tribe and that war. There was, and by many arguments, kind of an unjust war if it was for oil and resources and not for the weapons of mass destruction or whatever it might have been, right? So there's all these arguments of what causes that push towards idealism, the push towards, Allah and everything. I think scarcity comes back to the main point.
I do agree with you that is a good counter argument, because this is how a debate would go about this. It's counter argument and then counter argument against that, and then I have another counter argument, because you can go for a while with these sorts of things, but that's exploration of an idea, or in this case a problem is what it is like. So yes, I again do agree mostly with your analysis. It's just that there is also some percentage of true entitled, privileged, let's say, religious fundamentalism, which the best example wouldn't be necessarily even some Islamists, but it would be, for instance, in the United States, some of the very right-wing, super conservative, which from families that have been not in any way oppressed, but in-power families for a long time. And those people who would be maybe the kind of people who would be welcoming the second coming of Christ by starting a nuclear war when they get into the Oval Office and can push the big red button type people. It's just that the more to this extreme you get, the fewer of them there are. So then, like, if you want to be safe or make the world as safe as it can be from these like terrorism as a whole, then yes, like you start with addressing people in abject poverty and like who don't have the way to like don't have the ability to live full satisfying lives, and you sort of try to eliminate that. You rise people up, and so that diminishes the pool of potential terrorists or people who would be even in any way criminal. But that works up to a point. Then above that, you have, like you said, like people who are well off, but they still are tribal in their mentality and want to defend their broader tribe from a perceived oppressor or aggressor, or it could be objectively real oppressor and aggressor. And in that case, the way you deal with that is like you don't wage unjust wars to piss other tribes off. That's very easy to do because it costs a lot of money to do it. So it would be very, very cheap not to do it.
Not to do it
in that sense. But then, like what's left then are like the true entitled, privileged extremists who are the people who have from background of power, and so that they have sort of megalomania as like the issue that they have. So the question is then how to deal with these potential.
How to deal with those? Yes, I'll give you that. That's a great point. So let's talk about them for a sec. So I think that's definitely a tough one. So I think with them, a lot of the support they get, even too, if you look at a lot of the white nationalist groups, a lot of them are from either areas of the country that kind of got left behind. Oh, did I lose you there? Oh no, you're still there. A lot of their supporters, might be from the poverty group where they feel like their jobs were outsourced, or they feel like they got left behind somehow, or the immigrants stole their jobs, right? And they kind of profit from that pain and suffering, some of them. But you're right about the megalomania. So how do we deal with those 1%ers that are really just out there to make their billions, be famous, make the world in their own image, let's just say. They want to be gods. And that's okay. We want to make gods too, but we don't want gods to oppress others. We want everyone to be free to be gods and help one another, but we don't want gods to be free to torture and oppress and enslave. Right? So, we've kind of come full circle almost with this whole argument. And scarcity is definitely one of the 4 pillars that we talked about. So the only way, the other issue is finding purpose, giving these megalomaniac people, a purpose other than enslavement and control, giving them something fun to experience, or giving them a purpose for their megalomania that could be constructive, that could be objectively good for people. And like you said, catching them early, catching any kind of psychotic or, masochistic maybe tendencies where they just really want to hurt for whatever reason. If we can kind of catch that and somehow treat it or give them a new direction where they can kind of use it in a good way.
Yeah, I think those are 2 parts that will work on some of them. Like the constructive channeling, like I think it's sort of not well enough, but it's sort of starting to shift in that direction. If you look at people like the space race of the billionaires, like there's a lot to dislike about it. I've heard a joke, it's a fairly good joke, that with the Bezos, like how Bezos flew into space. And so somebody wrote somewhere, well, I don't mind like the billionaires like Bezos flying into space. I have a problem with them returning. But also if you take this seriously, it's like joke seriously, what that means, like if you've then like pushed these sort of captains of the industry to like colonize space or something, that could be a fairly constructive outlet for the people who are just their like brains are wired to just like maximizing efficiencies and just doing huge projects in as big of an area of influence as they can. It's just that it also has to be in an environment of regulation where these people will not also be able to control the government. So that's the issue of corporations being people and money being usable to influence in any capacity the politics. That's if you remove that, then the captains of the industry, billionaires, are less dangerous because they can do their own thing, and everybody who consents to work for them can work for them, and whatever the conditions are, as long as everybody has other options, meaning that they don't just have to work for Bezos or no one else. That's sort of the libertarian answer, is like that. In the libertarian model, what you just need is that the market as such, job opportunities for people is sufficient in that they can reject like some sort of megalomaniac sort of huge company space project, because that will also like improve the conditions in the megalomaniac's company, because they will have to offer better benefits and stuff to be competitive with the like just the fact that people maybe have basic income and don't have to work sort of to actually incentivize them. So that would sort of exactly they like way to sort of mitigate the sort of psychopathy of these people, is that like the system puts enough pressure on them to be nice. And so that's part of it. Then the other part of like catching psychotic behavior early, I think the way it connects with CEOs of corporations is that you can try to have a global shift in corporate culture towards. I'm sorry, I don't do it on purpose. That I always bring up Red Hat, but there's like companies, especially now in the software company space, that are shifting their culture in the company to be more like less masculine, macho, like aggressive, sort of chauvinistic culture of like top down, just like dictating people what they have to do every second of every like working hour. So like it's also like maybe one of the like solutions that's from the side of feminism is like bring more women into positions of leadership, like more sort of like have a more psychologically balanced environment. It's just like one of the practical solutions to the issue of the culture. And then if like the culture shifts, then maybe CEO positions won't be just like 100% rewarding psychopaths. So you can like do a lot of with like a corporate reform sort of that can even be driven from within the companies. That's not necessarily even something that has to be mandated from the outside, because they sort of are starting to figure it out on like the corporate sphere is sort of figuring it out on their own. As the world becomes more conscious about environmental issues and #MeToo issues and other issues, then the corporations like they actually are pressured by that to think inwardly and reform themselves from within.
And yeah, I mean, I love it how we've kind of come full circle with the 4 pillars solving these things. So the basic income is 2, making sure people have the option to choose not to work for these megalomaniacs. You know, if you give them that option, they'll have to be better. They'll have to have other incentives. So I love that. And then, you know, pillar 1 with the pollution, as long as you control the pollution or tax it in some way, tax these big companies. If they're going to fly into space, they've got to pay for the pollution costs of whatever that space travel costs. And then again, you can use all that money to feed back into good environmental programs or basic income programs and help make good things out of those big programs. If someone's going to buy a massive $300 million super yacht, they're going to pay 50%, you know, luxury tax on that. And then money's going to, again, go to help the poor and help do good things in the world. So it's totally fine if they want to buy these luxurious, extravagant things, as long as they're paying the right price for it.
Oh, the real price.
But they're not right now. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have to pay the real price of everything they do, you know, including pollution, including even the social costs. If it's a clear social cost of that, then it needs to be taxed accordingly, and that money used to remediate the social costs, whatever it might be. So I think we're at a great spot where we understand this better than ever before. We can put a cost on these things, and we can tax them accordingly. So yeah, I think the solutions are actually pretty good, and they all connect.
I just wanted to say that it's still not complete solution to the issue, and still not 100% enough. I'm just like, what I wanted to say is that I do agree that like you can systemically put pressure on these sort of sociopathic, psychopathic people to either be not so much pushed into the positions of like leading companies by the corporate reform, but also you can have the pressure even if they are in the leadership positions, because they're very driven people. So even if they end up there, so that the whole of society and this economic system can be exerting constructive counterbalancing pressures to their worst impulses. And sort of that even though they themselves can't really control themselves to not be evil, the whole system can sort of keep them in check, which brings me to the other part of the solution. And that is that in a lot of ways, there's these sort of economic fixes always leave the issue of people who are well off, but there's some ideological drive for them to do something evil. So in this case, they can be still empowered, like people who are essentially psychopathic, no, maybe not necessarily like captains of the industry, but like maybe in the leadership of religious organizations. There's like a much less practical, much more ideological whole sphere. Mm-hmm. So it could be in education or in science or in these highly abstract areas or in culture. So the bad people there who then can cause a lot of damage in their own ways, their power base is essentially people believing in them. And there's a part of the solution is, again, like you said, some people will believe in them because they are impoverished or because their tribe was attacked by someone, and the psychopaths are exploiting the grievances. And this. So yeah, there's a big part of like solving that is again solving all the economic side of the things and peace versus war side of it as well. But then that still leaves pure ideology and sort of pure just charisma and persuasiveness and cult of personality type stuff, which is again ingrained in us to some extent. Like some people are just very charismatic and can just exploit just talking and about stuff, and they can just convince people just by bullshitting them well enough. So in that case, you have to somehow find the way how to I hesitate to use that word, but like save the followers in the sense of like you have to really work on the sort of discourse. It's like when we have the deliberative democracy model that we've also touched on in one of the talks. So like where the quality of public discourse is good enough, and like of the people like the scientific authorities or like the people who actually, or journalists, or like people who are supposed to, like their function is supposed to be to like help people understand the world better. So like these people like really will have to like up their game to be able to have at least like as strong a pull away from the charismatic leaders as the charismatic leaders have towards them, so that to create some sort of impasse. So they can't be just resting on their laurels of like, I'm the highest scientific authority, so everybody has to believe me. They have to be persuasive speakers. So they have to sort of train the word for that is like civic society. You have to have a solid civic society, which this is one point that I just remembered. There's economic counterpart to how to make that happen as well, and that is like also how to depower the like billionaire psychopaths. Is like the main quantifiable issue of like a difference in wealth levels between different groups like between the lowest and the highest, or the least wealthy and most wealthy in the society, because that has been like accelerating out of control lately, and much like better period for United States in terms of like their culture and politics, like of the stability in the country and ability to actually do constructive stuff like build infrastructure and all the things that you need, was when it was kept much closer because the taxes on the richest were much higher. Like we had a period of like a 90+% tax on the very, very wealthiest. And one of the, like I've heard an analysis recently where what it did, for example, was that to escape being put into the insanely high tax bracket, CEOs took less money. And so their wages, in comparison to the worker wages, were much closer than they are now, which is something that has cultural impacts. Because like the closer in amount of wealth the people who lead the companies are to the people who work in the companies, the closer they feel together, and the more they have aligned interests with each other.